And it's a perfect follow-on to these amazing presentations overall, because to get to where they are, ecosystems matter tremendously. But if the question at hand is, do we need another Silicon Valley, or should we have another Silicon Valley, this will be a very short presentation, because I can say no, and we can all pick up and leave. That's not the relevant question at all. The relevant question, in a way, is how the next 5 years is going to be different than the last 5 years, and how things are positioned here in the UAE and Dubai and the region overall that will have something unique unto itself, leveraging lessons, perhaps, of things that have happened elsewhere, but something that will be much different overall. So if you'll bear with me, let me sort of talk about some of the most obvious changes that will happen for ecosystems in the 5 years coming, which are always different than the 5 years before, and I'll talk a little bit about ecosystems. If you're gathering, and if these talks have told us anything, there's a very unconventional truth. And the unconventional truth is, despite what we hear in news, we are living in the most amazing and wonderful days in world history. There is no time in world history I would rather be alive today. The macro data is on my side. We're living longer than ever before. We're killing each other less than ever before. We are feeding each other more than any time in world history. And we are seeing unprecedented rises of middle class in parts of the world that people would never have expected this even a few short years ago. Now, of course, macro data doesn't tell the whole story. There are many problems and many challenges, many people who suffer, who feel pain. But believe it or not, because of the things we just heard, I am more hopeful still. Because I can't tell you what Syria will look like in a year or what a flattening China will look like in 3. But I can tell you with 100% certainty that by the end of this decade, 2/3 of humanity will be walking around with a smart device in their pocket. And that is, of course, much more than a feature phone and a neat thing to have for entertainment, but it is literally the same computing capacity in 2/3 of humanity's hands that all of NASA had in 1969. It means unprecedented levels of being able to do things in powerful ways. When you look at the numbers, because it's really kind of obvious to say smart devices are coming at what level, they really are staggering. And what surprises me a lot is that the PC, for all intents and purposes, I think is going to be gone with the next 3 to 5 years overall. If that seems crazy, take a look at the history of what has happened globally here, where in 2008, PCs were 300 million units per year and declining slightly. But now, the last 3 years, there's also 1.5 billion smart devices moving very, very quickly, which people switch out at a very rapid level. The install base of iOS and Android around the world now are 3 billion devices, which is twice the number of PCs which there have ever been before. But this blows me away. 50% of people's times with a mobile device, not 50% of their technology time, 50% of their woken hours are with their mobile device being active and looking and doing things. Because that way, mobile doesn't really mean mobile. What it means is it's just part of our identity, part of our person, part of our behaviors in the way that Peter underscored are coming in many different and powerful ways going forward. It's instructive to see how some of the tech juggernauts have wrestled with the rise of mobile in their own ecosystems up until now. I'm a great admirer of Microsoft. I think the new management team is very impressive and something to watch, but the numbers speak for itself. In 2007, a few short years ago, literally, for all intents and purposes, all computing devices had Microsoft software in it now. It's 20% today. It'll be 10% by the end of the decade if things keep moving the way that they do. Interestingly, Google, the great founder, of course, of Android, who understands mobile very well, in their core business fell asleep at the switch. Because at the end of the day, most of the searches happen in desktops overall. So what happens? In a mobile world, people start to behave differently. So if I want to find a person, I'm not going to Google, I'm going to my LinkedIn app. If I want to find a restaurant, I'm not going to Google, I'm going to my Yelp app, and so on and so forth. They understand this and are addressing it, but it's important. Facebook actually is very instructive on this, because there was a time not long ago that people began to write it off because young people weren't using it anymore and they didn't understand, and they switched almost on a dime into mobile in very powerful ways with Messenger and, of course, WhatsApp. And now 3/4 of their business, which was 0 a few years ago, 3/4 of their business is in mobile. And when you travel around these growth markets that are so exciting, and you talk to people across all economic classes, they actually think of Facebook as the internet. You ask them, do you have the internet? They say no. Do you have Facebook or WhatsApp? They say yes. Very, very interesting phenomenon as this moves. And of course, when I built the businesses for the Washington Post and Newsweek, 85% of my audience came from search and traditional methods overall. You look at BuzzFeed today and you see some of these new services from Facebook, but of course you see things like Snapchat and other mobile capabilities which are revolutionizing and building their businesses overall. Now, I like to think of mobile in really 4 stages, and in terms of the supercomputing capacity of it, this is where we are now that we all know, where for all intents and purposes, mobile's like our PC. We can buy things, we can find things, we can search things. We begin to not care about owning things as much as long as we have frictionless ability to find the things that we want to find easily and can assume them on our person. But this, to me, builds into this next stage, which is happening now, which will be so important for ecosystem building here, which is as the next billion come into the system, new opportunities that require local understanding and local powers is something that is unprecedented overall. In fact, in Silicon Valley, people will often tell me that in these new worlds of a billion new people coming online, the great juggernauts are going to end up winning it all. And it is interesting, as you go to many markets where the governments have not changed things, the Facebook, the Twitter, the Snapchats of those worlds are Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat. But in point of fact, there's no reason why that has to be everywhere and all the time or assume it. And when you start thinking about an ecosystem in terms of what is understood locally and regionally, when you think about e-commerce, last mile, local language, and other capacities like that, I don't think there's any guarantee that new innovation and new things won't come from parts of the world regularly and understood in ways that do not make anything else seem inevitable. Everything that the gentleman before me talked about, of course, is going to be powered and put on steroids because we all will be thinking in the more mobile way that I've described before in the coming years. And eventually, and I think this is very shortly away, we will think about computing and power technology the way we think about water or electricity. We just simply don't talk about it anymore. My friend at Andreessen Horowitz, Benedict Evans, has this wonderful quote, "I installed an app on my Android smartphone, but we're never going to say that again in a few years. We're just going to assume that things will happen in engagement and our personal behaviors and understandings and algorithms will allow our lives to have greater facility, greater ability to think about how we engage with each other in unobvious and I think very powerful ways." And this to me I think is central overall because everything we've talked about this morning collectively is saying that we are not talking about simply change of things being better as they were, but we're talking about systemic change. And the way that we think about ownership, the way we think about time, the way we think about how we engage with each other, services we expect we need now that we may never need again, this is an absolutely transformational thing, which a new ecosystem can think about on its own terms. And it allows us to ask big systemic questions that we could never ask before. We can ask ourselves now, what is it going to be like when 1 billion and 2 billion more people are with us and engaged and collaborating? What does it mean for 1 billion or 2 billion people who simply don't even bank or don't even transact beyond a mile or a mile and a half of their home? And what kinds of opportunities that will build both for people and their power and their ability to create value, but also to be able to build an ecosystem exactly like that. What is it going to mean when we use genomics and other capabilities to come up with medical practices easily distributed on mobile capacity anywhere in the world at a fraction of the cost of the way that's done now, and it's going to make some of our best technology today look like bloodletting to our children? And what is it going to be at the end of the day, and I think this may be most essential of all, is when we think of work and labor for the next 1 billion or 2 billion, not merely as unseemly hours at unseemly wages, but other kinds of new abilities to let people expand, I think, in very powerful ways. You folks know this better than anyone. It's not only no different in the Arab world, I think there are elements here that are showing leapfrog into society that will take it beyond the rest of the world. My 2 favorite stats are the 2 last ones, because it really talks not about technology, but the nature of humans, and particularly the new and young generation, which is 90% or more simply assume that this is making their lives better and that they can take greater control of their lives overall. And therefore, 40, 50, 60%, depending on the country you go to, say, I want to actualize my idea, I want to start playing where these gentlemen talked about before, and I now can build the enterprise to do it. It is not going back. This, I think, is absolutely true. The Arab world writ large in smartphones will be equal with the rest of the world, and as you folks know, in the UAE alone, it is already well past these numbers now. I believe that this is absolutely like the sun setting in the west. And so as we think about this in ecosystem terms, leadership does matter for all the ability to communicate and do things at great distance because of the beauty of technology. Geography, I do think, matters overall. And in the leadership overall, there is no one in the region and in many places around the world better positioned to rethink ecosystem than the UAE. Your global leadership and what you've done in e-commerce and transportation and logistics, everything that you've done in last mile innovation, the fact that you see the things that we've seen at this very gathering, which means global competitive ideas will be birthed here in very powerful ways, means that an appreciation in the ecosystem to the access of this technology means greater opportunity to leapfrog places which have established patterns and behaviors that can't see or envision things on its own term freshly viewed. And this gets to the essence. The question should never, ever again be, what is the next Silicon Valley? It should be, what can we do to build a rapidly adaptable ecosystem? Because if you can take nothing away from Peter's presentation, adaptability and speed is at the essence of the world that we're having overall. Now, this is not to say there are not lessons to be learned by other ecosystems like Silicon Valley. There's this wonderful book I recommend to you by Annalee Saxion, a great professor at the University of Berkeley. It's actually 30 years old, this book, but it's unbelievably relevant today in talking not only about the rise of Silicon Valley on its terms, but the decline of Boston, which was effectively the Silicon Valley of America before. And it's very interesting, and it touches many themes that we hear in other panels over here. Culture matters a ton. If people think of life and culture as a zero-sum game, that competitors should only compete for that last nickel on the table, that's not the essence of a great ecosystem. Competitors who have an ability and an enthusiasm to raise all boats are very profound. And of course, is often talked about, but often is not yet addressed, so the new generation understands this well. Failure as an acceptance is very hard. It is never easy. I don't love to fail when I have failed, but it is essential in the thinking about what it means to build within an ecosystem overall. I'm going to talk in a minute a little bit more about education and rule of law, but the magnet of talent and the success that breeds success that has this multiplier effect unleashes incredible results in the new ecosystem. Because we have to remember overall that Silicon Valley took decades to form. There were many starts and stops when they did it overall, but the essence of it, with the many things that it does do, which is extraordinary, is the network effect of talent. The more outstanding people who want to be there, the more outstanding want to be there. And that's absolutely essential in the ecosystem overall. At the same time, I can tell you, when I go to Silicon Valley and I talk about things happening in the Middle East and in growth markets writ large, they look at me like they don't understand what I'm talking about. They're slow to understand what has been unleashed, and as I described in the first part of this talk overall, which is exactly the comparative advantage of ecosystems here, because you folks know that innovation gets redefined in a world when people are mobile first and have access to this capability. It's not just about the shiny new thing, though that has its place. It means that for the first time you are connected to the rest of the world, you are going to begin to do things differently with your life, and that is innovative at scale. And that can be unleashed and levered in very powerful ways. It's a different kind of way of thinking about innovation, or a complementary one about awesome problem solving that's never been there before. And it means in markets like here and other growth markets nearby, the progressive and rapid rise of middle classes means not only an engagement to be able to innovate for that, but to be able to build very large and scalable businesses and enterprises going forward overall. What is utterly essential, if you had to strap it all down, was what the professor talked about before, and about the legal and regulatory environment and the rule of law overall. There's a lot I could add to that marvelous presentation earlier, except to say that very often when I have traveled around the region, when people talk to me about reform, they're actually talking to me about the things which have nothing to do with the 21st century. To the degree you spend money or you put a lot of emphasis into teaching to standardized tests, to pushing on rote memorization, it is the antithesis really of where the world is going, because nothing in many respects, in parallel perhaps with mathematics and technology skills that Neil deGrasse Tyson spoke about, nothing really at its essence is more important than inspiring critical thinking and questioning and creativity that can bring things to bear in areas. If you take your teachers seriously, you pay them well, you train them well, this is all essential and important as well. But at the end of the day, the emphasis on creative thinking, I think, can be easier. And the kinds of presentations we had before begs the interesting questions. How can technology be deployed to scale this faster? Because we all know the demographics of young people being born today, and if you look at it through a traditional mindset, that just says, I'll never be able to build enough schools in time. But that's not the right question. The right question is 1 billion more people, or in the case of the region, hundreds of millions of more people, are going to have access to technology devices where you can supplement education, have different kinds of education, or reinvent education in its totality overall. Curriculum revision, I think, is very important as long as it focuses on critical thinking. And I think there's an unbelievable opportunity for the private sector to get more and more involved, as they've done in smaller projects like Injaz Al Arab, because at the end of the day, no one has a better stake in wanting to have a great educated workforce than the people who are trying to build businesses, I think, in very powerful ways. And again, it's the same idea, and one of the things I just was so excited about coming out of the UAE and Dubai shortly is enforcing the teaching of entrepreneurship in schools. What a brilliant idea, and what a serious statement that it is about the academic traditions, but at the same time, it is about building the schools and the mindset which are so powerful with the opportunities that can come with it overall. I think as we think about rule of law and regulation, there really is one guiding umbrella theme that if any policy falls under it, you're probably on the right side of history. Are we facilitating the easy movement of people, ideas, goods, and services and capital? If we're doing that, this is exactly what is needed in a great ecosystem in the 21st century, and with that, making sure things are consistent, are predictable and understandable so that people and businesses and organizations and governments can actually do more long-term building and what they're trying to build overall. Obviously, world-class technological infrastructure is something that is being taken very, very seriously here in powerful ways, as is in growth capital. And so in a lot of respects, when people ask me again about a future of a Silicon Valley, I much prefer to say, let's talk about the ecosystem of the UAE and Dubai. Because I think the things that you're doing here in many of these policy areas right now, the faster and harder that you do them, that leadership will happen in very, very powerful ways. And again, will become irreversible. And it is, as it's already become, a magnet of talent, of the best who want to be there to help the best who want to be there, which not only have ramifications around the region, but literally around the world and certainly around growth markets. I have this talk in Washington with macroeconomist friends of mine who really write me off as if all this stuff is kind of cute and a sideshow of a sideshow. It has nothing to do with the big issues of our time. But I can assure you, throughout history, every major technological advancement was written off by macroeconomists who thought it was cute and a sideshow and not profound. And we know from this gathering, and we know from the things that you're committing, that this is going to be a very, very different thing that's coming overall. And I wrap up my presentations regularly because I think about this regularly, and it annoys my friends who hear me speak before because I use it too often, but I think it's important, and it's a wonderful quote from Václav Havel, the first president of Czechoslovakia after the wall fell. He makes a distinction between hope and optimism. Hope, he said, is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. Because of what I've seen across the region overall, I am a deeply hopeful man. Because what I've seen in the last day and in recent visits to the UAE and Dubai, I'm actually now an optimistic man. Thank you very much.